Hello and welcome to Deep Blue Sea, the podcast. I am your ho-ho-host, Jay Cluett, and on this show, myself and my regular co-ho-host, Mark Hoffmeyer, have sailed our way, dived our way through the Deep Blue Sea trilogy, one chapter at a time, now looking at some Deep Blue Sea adjacent films, which are films that feature sharks, or aquatic action, or, as is the case with this lovely festive month, we're celebrating Happy Harlan Days with the two Christmas-themed Rennie Harlan films. I'm sorry. We're starting today with Die Hard 2. Later this month, you're going to get The Long Kiss Goodnight. That'll be our month of festive films. So what is Die Hard 2? Well, it is the sequel to Die Hard, directed by Rennie Harlan, released in 1990, starring, of course, Bruce Willis, along with returning Bonnie Bedelia, William Atherton, Reginald VelJohnson, and newcomers including Franco Nero, William Sadler, John Amos, and Dennis Franz. Bruce Willis is now an LA cop, but he's still out of his element, this time at Dulles Airport in Washington, where he's meeting his wife on a plane. But wouldn't you know it, terrorist action, there's an incoming drug lord, and hilarity ensues. So I need somebody who, big fan of the Die Hard films, or at least we'll find out how many of them, I think, who hasn't been on the show since the appropriate Exploding Helicopter chapter of Deep Blue Sea from the Exploding Helicopter podcast, is Will Slater. Will, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for inviting me back on to talk. Thanks for inviting me back on to talk about the only Die Hard film that doesn't have an exploding helicopter in it.
It's close. It's close. I was on your podcast recently to talk about Evasive Action, where we discussed how Con Air feels like it should have an exploding helicopter, but doesn't. Die Hard 2 gets close. It has an exploding, a nearly exploding snowmobile. It has like a couple of planes go up, and there is a helicopter in it.
Yeah,
but
a church
survives.
blows up as well. A snow speeder, or not snow speeder, a snowmobile, explodes as well. Dennis Franz's temper explodes multiple times throughout this film. But yeah, sadly no helicopter. But an absolute tragedy for a Die Hard movie.
So I'm hoping that lack of exploding helicopter doesn't make this your least favourite Die Hard film.
It really should do, but then they obviously made Die Hard 5, and that just changed the whole conversation.
Yes. Our friend of the show, Movie Rob, who is doing Die Hard Minute over on his podcast, Movie Rob Minute, he intends to do all of the films in the franchise, I think, except for maybe number 5. Which, I think his plan is to do a one-off, just kind of cover it with a bunch of people making fun of it, rather than going through one of the worst films ever made, minute by minute.
That's about as much as that film deserves. It's probably more than that film deserves.
I have seen it. I have watched it. I've rented it and sat through it, and I can remember nothing about it at all.
Well, I saw Die Hard 5 in the cinema with a friend of mine, and we were both finding it awful. And I looked across at my mate, and he'd actually drifted off to sleep, and I didn't see why I should have to sit through this film on my own. So I rather selfishly just woke him up to make sure that he could be inflicted with the same torture that I was being exposed to.
I wasn't sure if you were going to say you woke him up or you got up and left him there.
I think either. I mean, to be honest, if I could have fallen asleep during that film, I would have as well. So, frankly, you get through Die Hard 5 whatever way that is, whether it's walking out, falling asleep, or just sadistically making sure that anyone else with you has to watch the damn thing as well.
Or, as I did, obliterating it from memory entirely after the experience is over. So maybe I fell asleep as well. I have no idea. It's quite possible. Good. So you and I have a slight history with Die Hard 2 in that the show I used to host, Alarmcast, once I took over it, I instigated December Movie of the Month, which were films submitted by Alarm members, were voted upon, and the winner got a show dedicated to it. December became the Holiday Special, and Die Hard 2 was the film first voted, the first Holiday Special Movie of the Month, and it was championed by yourself. So why did you pick Die Hard 2 over, say, Die Hard or any other film? Why did that?
Ooh, well, I think I'm not sure I can cast my mind back that far to quite why I
It was, I think, 9 years ago.
It was 9 years ago. I'm not sure I can remember the circumstances behind that. But you know what? I was probably tired of sort of all of this stuff around, Die Hard being the ultimate, Christmas movie, and some people just endlessly sort of hailing it as the ultimate Christmas movie, as if no one has hailed the movie in that way before. So I thought I was probably, as much as I'm like to do in my life in various ways, I was probably just trying to deliberately go against the grain by putting forward Die Hard 2 as the kind of the Christmas movie. So I was probably just being a bit of a contrarian by selecting that. But overall, it's Die Hard 2 is I think it's a really good entry in the Die Hard series, and there has been periods of time where Die Hard 2 has been much unloved. I cast in my mind back to the mid-90s where, after you had Die Hard with a Vengeance, and so Die Hard 2 then became, the least loved or the worst film in the series. But obviously those questions and debates evolved because they then produced Die Hard 4.0, which some people, many people, quite rightly, I think, to a certain degree, have some major issues with that film. And then, as we've already discussed, they then went and, the bed and made Die Hard 5.
Well, Mark is a fan of Die Hard 4. I think he just, the fact that they kill a helicopter with a car, it's like something like, that's not something anyone has seen before. Maybe you probably, if anyone has, it's you, I guess. But I think there's some stuff to like about it. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is an actress I've always enjoyed. So she doesn't get a lot to do in that film, and Timothy Olyphant is always wonderful. He should maybe get more to do in there as well. But that's a film I look forward to being a guest on Die Hard a Minute a couple of years in the future to talk about the first 5 minutes of that one, just to revisit it. It's been a while. We shall see. But let's get into Die Hard 2. So when it was released, it was the most expensive film ever made. I think a lot was made about that in the press, which, in my opinion, it shouldn't have been, because it only had that title for a month, basically. Total Recall came out a month earlier and cost up to $60 million, and then Die Hard 2 came out a month later and cost up to $70 million, and then the following year, Terminator 2: Judgment Day came out at $94 million. So it blew it out of the water entirely. But it was deemed an absurd amount of money to have been spent on a film by some of the producers of the film. And people had major doubts that it would recoup any of that or that amount back again, despite the first Die Hard making more than that.
That's quite an incredible statistic you've unearthed there, Jay, because I never would have ever thought that Die Hard 2 would ever have been, even for a month, have been the most expensive movie ever made. Well, I'm not trying to say that it looks cheap or anything, but equally, it's like, well, did it really cost the most amount of money ever spent on a film to make this film?
It was plagued with some pretty horrendous production issues, mainly involving snow or a lack of snow, because they shot the airport scenes in Denver during a particularly warm winter where there was no snow. And if you recall, all the outside scenes have snow in them, so they had to get fake, and you couldn't have artificial snow anywhere near a runway because it could potentially interfere with the airplanes. So they had to basically make real snow every day that they were shooting. So I looked into it, and they had to get these giant ice makers. That had to be towed with 300-pound blocks of ice, a 40-foot long trailer for the ice machine. They had to start these machines 6 hours before filming every day. So basically, it's hell they had to go through just to make snow for a lot of the film, and I think that ate into a lot of the budget.
Well, you know what? I love that fact, because that gives a new kind of meaning to that line at the end of the film that Franco Nero has, where he thinks he's about to make his escape with the rest of the villains, and they're talking about the snow, and he says, because I can't remember what island in the Caribbean they're all going to land on, but he says, we'll import snow for you if you like it that much, and but who knew that was actually what they were doing in the production of this film?
Yeah, and 10% of that 70 million budget went just to Bruce Willis. He was paid $7.5 million for his.
That I can believe. Yeah. That I can believe.
He apparently was not a delight to work with on the set. He'd become something of a diva between the two films, and wasn't the easiest person to work with.
Well, he wasn't easy to work with at all around this period. I mean, possibly even ever in his career, because obviously obviously Hudson Hawk came out not long after this, where he was famously very difficult to work with on that particular project. So yeah, he very quickly became an absolute pain in the proverbial to work with.
Yes, and I think if you listen to any of Kevin Smith's shows, that remained so for a while after as well. But yes. There we are. And so they wanted John McTiernan to make this one again, but he was already deep underwater making The Hunt for Red October. So Renny Harlin was approached to direct it. He was making Alien 3 at the time. Left that.
How did that go?
Not well. If you recall, he did not make that film.
Yes.
Yes. David Fincher regretted making that film for some time, I believe. So there were creative differences, and he left Alien 3 and went on to make The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. Have you seen The Adventures of Ford Fairlane?
Seen it. I haven't even heard of it.
Okay, it is the film that came out that he made late '89, but came out a week after Die Hard 2. So Renny Harlin had two films out in the space of a fortnight. It stars Andrew Dice Clay,
right?
The American comedian. I actually quite enjoyed it. He's a rock and roll detective.
Okay, this sounds like a concept that could work in the right hands, and possibly not Renny Harlin's.
I think it works well. There's like three different rock and roll related crimes being resolved. One of them's like someone dies on stage, someone's gone missing, that kind of thing. And Ford Fairlane, Andrew Dice Clay, is kind of recruited to tie them all together. And it's like Wayne Newton is the bad guy. Robert Englund is in there as a kind of a henchman. You got Ed O'Neill plays a former disco star turned police lieutenant. I'm making this sound terrible.
Great film.
But like Gilbert Gottfried's in there, Morris Day, Tonal Oak. There's a lot of like cameos all over the place. I would recommend The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. It never really made it across to the UK. I don't think it ever had a UK release. But it's worth tracking down, I think. But yeah, so Harlin was making that, and he said as soon as he finished making that, he would go on to make Die Hard 2. And they just about pulled it together, but then they kind of screwed over Ford Fairlane by releasing it in the same month as Die Hard 2. I can't quite tell why, but either way, Die Hard 2 was made a bit of a rush, because he didn't start until late '89. It came out in July 1990. But I agree with you with it being a good film. To me, it is still the third best Die Hard film. Die Hard with a Vengeance is amongst my first ever favourite films. That was the first Die Hard film I saw, and I love it to this day. Die Hard is, of course, Die Hard. It's near perfect and wonderful. Die Hard 2 suffers from just not being Die Hard, I guess. But still
exactly.
It's still.
I think that's what a lot of people sort of held against the film. Because I saw this film in the cinema, so I have kind of sort of lived through the release of all of the Die Hard films. So yes, I certainly in the kind of early to mid 90s, the most of the grumbling about Die Hard 2 was that it wasn't Die Hard, which, I mean, the fact that it's not the greatest, fact that Die Hard 2 isn't the greatest action movie of all time. Well, I mean, most things are going to fall short against.
Only one will be that.
Yes.
But yeah, I like it. It's not one I go to as often as Die Hard, but I feel like I should. It feels less Christmassy as well. There's more.
Really?
I mean, I know it's set at Christmas Eve, but I feel like Die Hard itself has a dead guy wearing a Santa hat. This has Dennis Franz mentioning a reindeer at one point, but we never really see the reindeer.
Yeah, but you've got, there are Christmas trees in the background. You've got people, carrying, I think there's like people carrying presents, and the whole thing of everyone is making their journeys because it is Christmas Eve. And obviously you have the critical ingredient of snow, which I think is a major, sort of, plus point in the Christmassiness of Die Hard 2.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's not Christmassy. It just doesn't feel as Christmassy as Die Hard.
Okay.
But that's it's still a film that you can watch all year round. It just, I guess.
Would it have been, should Bruce Willis have made a few quips about mince pies or something in Die Hard 2? Would that have got it over the line?
I'd have been happy if he did, but apparently one of his Diva-esque moments was he didn't want to make as many puns and quips as he did in the first film. He wanted to be more serious because the film he'd made previous to this hadn't done as well critically as he wanted it to. In Country, he'd made it as thinking it would be like an Oscar contender, and it wasn't really. So Bruce Willis said, I want to shed my comedic background and become more of a dramatic actor with Die Hard 2.
Well, what you say there actually makes sense, because actually when you're watching Die Hard 2, quite a lot of the quips are very clearly like ADR'd in, and I just assumed, that was because, well, he's got his head under a parachute, so you can't get a microphone in there, so they've just recorded that in post, and there are some other examples, and you just think, oh well, maybe it was just they couldn't mic that particular scene, so they just the idea was always to put that kind of audio in later. But I wonder if you did get a kind of they shot it serious, tested it, and it's like, where are the quips? The audience are here for the quips, and get Bruce into a recording booth, come up with here are 12 funny lines, just say them.
What I find odd about his decision to try and make this more dramatic is the films that preceded and followed Die Hard 2 are Look Who's Talking and Look Who's Talking Too, in which he obviously voices a baby. So I don't think he quite thought the plan through.
No. Yes. I think perhaps Bruce Willis isn't the best kind of pilot for his own career. I think that might be the conclusion we can draw from all this.
Yeah. So he's returning in Die Hard 2. We also have returning Bonnie Bedelia, William Atherton with more to do this time around, I think, and Reginald Vell Johnson with far less to do because he was hardly available. I think they had 2 days to shoot with Al Powell. How do you think these returning characters do?
Well, I think they do largely very well, and I want to kind of go straight to William Atherton and as his role as Dick Thornburg, because he's obviously the douchebag of Die Hard and Die Hard 2, but I actually think, I'm talking in terms of my day job. I work within I work in media relations. Dick Thornburg is a good journalist.
He has a gift. He brings you in. He makes you curious.
He is a good journalist. If he was working for your news organization, he would be, you'd be pleased to have him on your staff. Yes, he is, has some, he makes some, decisions which people might find like, morally questionable. But in terms of what you need to do as a journalist, what your editor would expect you to do as a journalist, he is doing it. He is delivering it. He's a great journalist, and I kind of think he gets. I kind of feel he gets a bit of an unfair bum rap in these two films. So I really appreciated seeing him in this film, seeing him latch onto this terrorist story break that news from the kind of the toilet of the 747 that he's on. He's got everything working against him in that situation. He's got Bonnie Bedelia with her, with the business with the restraining order, the kind of, the stewardess is ordering him back to his seat. He's improvising on the fly. I mean, that is a great piece of journalism.
He had a first class ticket, and they didn't have first class seats left. He is the victim here. He's got to sit with the rest of the cattle. Like.
But, one thing I was thinking actually on this rewatch was about all of these like returning faces, was that kind of, because as I say, I've sort of, grown up and aged with this film, and certainly sort of, there used to be sort of like an idea that, these actors were just being crowbarred into this sequel, which in some ways they are, but, in recent years, we've just seen umpteen franchises just, everything from from Star Wars to the Fast and Furious movies, just like, okay, we're going to bring everyone back who's ever been in one of these films, and nobody has a problem with it. And I was like, hang on, we had
die in the last one.
Yeah, we had a couple of characters who actually had, fairly reasonable reasons for being in this film, and people had a problem with it. Where, as you say, with the Fast and Furious movies, we're just bringing back characters who were very clearly killed.
Yeah, because people like them.
Because people like them. So, what was everyone grumbling about with, bringing back, our pal for a little fax machine action with Bruce Willis.
I mean, his makes the most kind of sense because he's like, for all we know, they work together because they're both LA cops. The kind of the bigger coincidence is Thornburg being on the plane with Holly, but I have no problem with that. Like, they both happen to be flying there. That people get on planes. It's never really explained what Thornburg's doing there, but we don't really need to know. He's tracking down. Maybe he's going to cover the same story as Sam Coleman.
Exactly.
Esperanza
I
coming
mean,
in. Yeah.
If you're going to question that, you might as well question what are the odds of, Bruce Willis happening to be in Dulles Airport on the same day that, General Esperanza is rocking up there in his.
And that's a question that is
plane.
asked at least twice in this film. Why does this keep happening to us? Yeah, so I like. I mean, William Atherton, always great, always, as you say, a douche, and he's just so good at it. always enjoy him playing a terrible character, and yeah, I agree he is a good journalist, though he does always seem to be trying to leave whatever place he is working for to head up the ladder to the next one. But he's ambitious.
Why is ambition? You can't, ambition is not a dirty word, not in my book, Jay.
Yeah, fair enough. Bonnie Bedelia her main role just seems to be to insult him with every line that she's got, which again she does well. She seems to be fine with. And Reginald Paul Johnson, he's fine at the end of the phone. We get as much of him as we need. But what the Die Hard franchise kind of lives and dies on is generally the villains. Certainly with Alan Rickman in the first one, and here we have the term. Do you remember the term that we coined for this back on the Lambcast 9 years ago for the group of bad guys in Die Hard films?
No, but I'm sure you can fill me in on what I've erased from my mind.
A sphincter of arseholes was the term that you came up with as the collective noun for arsehole. Something that has stuck with me. I have not re-listened to that show. That has just stuck with me for 9 years.
I was a much better guest back then, Jay.
Not at all. But we certainly have that here with not just the spoiler alert of Die Hard 2. We have Franco Nero, William Sadler playing bad guys. John Amos, also secret bad guy. And then the main one that I feel like you want to talk about is Dennis Franz as Captain Carmine Lorenzo, kind of the chief of police at the airport. Dennis Franz, not an actor I know terribly well. I mainly know him from this. I've never seen him in NYPD Blue, for instance, which I believe he's done several thousand episodes of. So where are you more familiar with him from?
Yeah, well, he's one of those. Well, I watched NYPD Blue, and the first series of that in particular was fantastic because he played this, alcoholic cop who was, kind of played by his own rules, a bit of a loose cannon, didn't mind sort of bending the rules. And at that time, he was partnered with David Caruso,
Okay.
and in the first series, and it was really fantastic television, that first series. Very, because Caruso was playing quite a sort of like highly strung character, so the two of them together was quite edgy, like gritty stuff. You kind of didn't know, when they were interrogating a suspect. I mean, there was a palpable sense of like danger, in the sense of, okay, this guy they're talking to, could end up with his, skull caved in. And he was brilliant in that particular part. Caruso, basically, kind of had a bit of the Bruce Willis complex, Bruce Willis syndrome about him. And after the success of the first series, he was like, okay, I'm the star of the series. I want like sort of massive pay rise. I don't think he didn't get what he wanted, so he walked out on the series because he said, I'm going to be big in movies. And then he made Jade with William Friedkin, which like tanked at the box office. Made some other remake of Kiss of Death with Nicolas Cage that kind of sunk without trace. And so Dennis Franz then was suddenly found himself sort of like as the kind of the lead of that series, and rather sort of tragically, they decided to kind of clean him up as a character, which was kind of the sort of, so he kind of quits drinking, finds love, and then becomes this sort of older sage character. But even though the fact that series started like sandpapering the rough edges off of the character that had really made the series so compelling, it was still a decent watch. And he was, despite the way which the series kind of evolved the character, he was still really like compelling character in that particular series. So yeah, I've got a lot of affection for Dennis Franz as an actor. But yeah, in this film, he is obviously playing another cop, another combustible cop, and he loves to blow his top in this particular movie.
He is delightful. I have no other word for it. I think he's fantastic here. He's my highlight is every time he opens his mouth. He's when when he's just he hates John McClane from second one.
Oh yeah,
because he's an LA cop, which I like. I like they've changed the character of McClane. Like if he was a New York cop, they might respect him a little bit, but he's moved to LA. He's an LA cop. They don't care about LA people up here, actors and such.
But he's also that kind of classic, he's an airport cop. So I think there's also the idea of, he feels like he hates John McClane because like John McClane is a real cop in inverted commas, whereas he's just like an airport cop, which isn't real police. So he's enjoying the opportunity to kind of take down John McClane, this kind of like real cop who's kind of, come into his world. So I think there's this idea with his character in this film that he's this, that Franz is this sort of big fish in a small pond.
He literally says that. You're in my small pond and I'm the big fish in it. I think it's a line that he said.
But one thing I was thinking actually about when I was watching this film for this particular podcast, I was like, what would have been great was if they'd had a spin-off series. I'd love to have watched a spin-off series of basically sort of like, Dulles Airport PD, and each week it would be sort of Dennis Franz just raging at different sort of groups of travelers that were coming through the airport, and I don't know, they put their luggage down in the wrong area, and so he just overreacts, arrests them all, perhaps there's a group of nuns or something who comes through the airport, and for whatever reason, Dennis Franz becomes convinced that they're a group of terrorists, so he kind of like hauls them in for some overly aggressive questioning or something. I'd love to have seen this sort of spin-off Dennis Franz Airport PD series.
I would love that. So that very much like Die Hard 2 stories or something. Just the further adventures of Captain Carmine Lorenzo and his brother Sergeant Vito Lorenzo.
Exactly. I mean, the Die Hard 2 already kind of creates this whole world of the kind of like the airport police force that just feels rich for more and deeper exploration.
And you've got the kind of the janitor character Marvin just roaming around the basement all the time, adding some comic relief. Yeah, this should exist.
One thing I was thinking: does Marvin actually even work at that airport, like officially? I mean, he kind of, I forget the name of the character in Office Space, the kind of guy
the Stephen Root character.
Well, kind of, the guy, I don't know who, he's kind of like, he's been sacked years ago, but keeps coming in anyway, and people sort of can't tell him to like go home.
The one who it's his stapler. They take his stapler.
Exactly. I kind of like wonder if that's with like Marvin, and because I was, maybe it's because I was also thinking about that guy who lived in the kind of like Paris airport for 17 years because he was sort of like in sort of like international no man's land, and maybe that's the
terminal.
Case.
Tom Hanks in the terminal.
Exactly, because obviously that's based on a true story, and maybe that's the case with Marvin in the fact that he's like airside, so technically he's in sort of like international territory, and they can't get him out of his airport. So maybe he's maybe no one knows that he's just living underneath the runways in these tunnels.
So he's like Carmine Lorenzo's foil, like he's his nemesis. He just the main driving arc of the series is him trying to get Marvin out of the airport. He just can't. It's always foiled again.
I like this. They should have, this is what they should have done instead of Die Hard 4, and certainly instead of Die Hard 5.
Yes, very much so. Like we can take a cameo from Bruce Willis, maybe just like get up on the phone again. Hey Marvin, how's it going? Maybe try this to get one over on Lorenzo this time.
Absolutely, we can have little cameos from in one episode. Reginald Vale Johnson breezes through for some reason. You could bring back all sorts of. I love it.
Nice, yes. So just before we kind of depart Dennis Franz. How familiar are you with the Dixie Chicks song Goodbye Earl?
Not at all.
Okay. You must watch the music video for this song because it stars Dennis Franz.
Okay.
Who the song is about these two women, one of whom is played by Jane Krakowski from 30 Rock. They're school friends, grow up. One of them leaves town, the other one stays behind and marries Earl. And Earl is played by Dennis Franz. This came out just a few years after Die Hard 2. I think it actually came out in 98, I think 99. So about a decade after, but he's playing someone in his 20s. So he's got like a terrible wig. He's driving like a American muscle car. He's got the shades and the moustache, and he's an abusive husband, basically. This is the most upbeat, fun song about an abusive relationship you'll ever hear. But Dennis Franz is great in it. He gets to be a zombie dancing the Thriller dance. It's delightful, and I just have to put anyone who's like seen Die Hard 2 and wants to see more of that character playing a ludicrous person in a music video should check out the Dixie Chicks Goodbye Earl.
That sounds magnificently random.
Apparently, he ran into the Dixie Chicks behind in a talk show sometime, and they hit it off, and then he's in their music video. So wonderful. So let's get into the other villains of the piece. We're introduced to the first one, William Sadler, doing some kind of naked Tai Chi in a hotel room somewhere, which, as intros go, is a pretty unique one. I gotta say. Any thoughts on this?
Now again, this was a good rewatch for me because I was sort of noticing things that and things were popping into my mind that I hadn't sort of thought of before. But yes, that naked Tai Chi, a fabulous character introduction. But I was watching this in HD for the first time, and I think you can't see William Sadler's, Reginald Vell Johnson, but you can. I think if you look in the mirror, you can see like a lump that I think is the outline of William Sadler's Vell Johnson.
I'm not going to look for this. I'm going to take your word for it. I only have a standard def DVD copy, and that's good enough for me.
I kind of need I feel like I need closure on this, so I may need to sort of hunt down the 4K restoration for kind of definitive answer to this particular question. But I did rewind it, give it a second look, and there is a break in the line of his sort of leg that I think, well, there's only one thing that can be.
Excellent. Good. Didn't think we'd be talking about that on the show.
I'll leave you with that picture in your mind, Joe.
Thank you. Much appreciated. So Sadler's playing Colonel Stewart, who is pretty obviously trying to rescue, escape General Esperanza, Franco Nero's character, who's being brought in, and then John Amos's Major Grant arrives halfway through the film to take out Colonel Stewart, but it turns out they're all in league with each other. I think all three of these guys are good, but as with Die Hard 2 not being Die Hard, they're not Alan Rickman. They don't quite light up the screen as much as he did.
Yes, I think that's completely fair to say, and I think possibly part of that is the way in which is the kind of plot that I think with in the first film with Alan Rickman taking all of these people hostage in the tower block, it kind of gives him the opportunity to kind of lord it over the people that he's holding hostage, and it kind of gives you those more moments where he can be a little bit more of a theatrical villain, whereas I think with the kind of the plot here, you don't quite get that. Well, it's a completely different setup, and it doesn't quite give you those particular opportunities. So I think it kind of suffers a little bit from that. I do think that they part of there's things that happen with Franco Nero's character as General Esperanza. There's a kind of completely pointless moment where he takes over the plane.
Yeah.
Which that he doesn't need to do that at all.
It was going to land anyway.
Exactly, and the only reason is to kind of give Franco Nero his moment as a villain to make him look like to not, otherwise he'd be he'd probably look like quite an impotent character. So we have that. It's quite an enjoyable sequence to watch. The fact that who's going to fly the plane, and Franco Nero says, I will, shoots the guy dead. I enjoyed that moment. It makes not a lick of sense, but we're not watching these films for kind of gritty verisimilitude.
No, yeah, Franco Nero again is another actor that I've heard of this guy far more than I've seen his films, so I always expected Franco Nero's in this. This is going to be he's going to have a lot to do, but he kind of doesn't have a great deal. He's the package. Basically, they bring him in and they take him away and then he dies.
Exactly, he's the sort of the MacGuffin, isn't he, of this particular movie? So yeah, talking about. Just to nip back to William Sadler's character, I was looking because he is a colonel, isn't he? Yes. That's his rank, and John Amos's character, is Major Grant, but in the kind of, it seems to be in the sort of the context of the film that actually William Sadler's character kind of served under John Amos's character.
Yeah.
But William Sadler's character actually has a higher rank. He's a colonel is superior to a major. And actually, I looked this up. John Amos was 51 when he made this film, and the average age in the US Army of a major is 33. So, John Amos is far too old to really be a major.
Maybe he got demoted.
Maybe
he was in charge of Stuart, and then when
things went wrong with him,
when he left, they're like, you were in charge of him. You're back down to major now. Be lucky it's not private.
Well, that did also kind of, I guess that could also play into the fact of, okay, why is John Amos, be involved in this particular plot? It's for, he feels passed over. He's the oldest major in the army, and he's like, God damn it, sod the US military. I'm gonna take this filthy lucre from Esperanza and betray my official oaths.
Yeah, I think that's it. I know John Amos from The West Wing, so it's nice to see him play a bad guy, where he's like playing a very good guy in The West Wing, and here he's just.
But average age of a colonel in the US Army is 45, and William Sadler was 40 when he made this film. So obviously he was fast tracked for promotion, because obviously he's 40, but he's been out of the army for a few years prior to this. So obviously he was rocketing up the ranks when he was.
He had such potential, and then he squandered it, and they had to throw him out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, you hate to see it. So is there anybody else amongst the cast who stands out to you? We've got the likes of Art Evans and Fred Thompson as other people in the airport. Are you a Star Trek fan? Well,
I wouldn't say I'm a fan, but I have watched quite a lot of Star Trek. I'm familiar with most of it to some degree or another.
So were you familiar with Cole Meany as O'Brien prior to Die Hard 2?
Yes.
So what was it like to see him playing an English pilot blowing up in this film?
Well, I think actually I'd need to double check, but I think Cole Meany this was sort of where he was really sort of breaking through, because I think it was like either the year after this or the next year, or 92, where he made The Commitments, where he kind of really sort of then became.
It was 91, so the following year.
91, so it was the kind of year after it. So it's a very, very small role here. And then obviously later turns up in Deep Space Nine, which was sometimes after this. But yeah, I guess I was less sort of interested in Cole Meany, the sort of being in this as the fact that, we do see that jumbo jetliner of British stereotypes being, royally
just like British Rail. We'll get you there.
Being royally blown up by, and it is a sort of grievance that I hold against this film. It's like, what, it was an active choice. We're going to blow up the plane. American, was it that Americans don't want to see, their own fellow citizens be blown up, or is there some sort of secret Schadenfreude that let's make them British because the Americans will really love that.
We dropped a British guy for building last time. Let's blow up a whole plane of them.
Exactly. Or was it a decision that they made because they thought, well, if no one really cares about Americans that much, but if we blow up a jumbo jetliner full of British people, they'll really know how serious these guys are. So it's an interesting choice. I don't quite know what to make of it, though. I don't know if you got any ideas on that front.
Well, I think this plane blowing up makes this the Rennie Harlin film with the highest body count. I would have to check that. This isn't like Cliffhanger also has a plane blowing up, but far fewer people were on it.
Oh yeah, hardly anyone on that.
Yeah, and there are some films I haven't seen yet. I'm guessing there's a body count to Exorcist at the beginning. Haven't got there yet, but I will do someday. I don't know how many people die in The Legend of Hercules. We'll get there someday. But of the ones that I've covered, this is definitely the highest body count, and it does feel like, my God, they killed a whole plane. Like, there's 243 people on board, I think they say. It's definitely over 200. And it's just like the comparison with Die Hard, it's the scene where they like you show these guys mean business is they shoot Takagi and they shoot Ellis. Like those two people die. They kind of prove like, oh my god, they mean business. Here it's they kill a whole plane load of people. This is ridiculous. It's just like I get heightening the stakes, but my god. Like every Die Hard film kind of increases in scope. Like the first one's a building, the second one's an airport, the third one's New York, the fourth one is the internet, kind of. I forget, and then the fifth one is Russia. So like again, no one knows what the fifth one's about. But this just seems too much of a step up for me, taking out a whole plane. I don't know what they could have done to show they mean business on a smaller scale, other than a smaller plane. But like this is Christmas Eve in a major airport, so it's going to be a plane. This is all they kind of have to do.
Why do you want your villains to kind of pull their punches? Surely you want overkill from a villain. Like, you know, you want your villains. I want to take over the world. You don't want them going. If I can't take over the world, I'd be happy with just the Isle of Wight.
I was thinking the other way. They can have it. My grandparents currently live there. Get them off. They can have the rest of it. It's fine. It's the Isle of Wight is in the 1950s, and we'll stay there forever. So I get what you're saying. I guess it's that one shot then of the stewardess walking down the aisle and reassuring everyone about the flights and like we'll get you there on time and everything, and then blowing it up. It's that extra layer. It's not enough that we know that there's people on board and we've met the pilots. We have to meet all of the passengers as well. It's like the start of Final Destination, where they say, "Oh, you have to be a real sick god to let this plane go down," after showing the numerous passengers on it, and then obviously that plane blows up. That's the plot of that film. But this isn't a horror film. This isn't a survival horror. This is like a Die Hard 2. It's a Christmas film. Blow up a plane full of people you just got to know. But it works. It makes us think, my God, what are they going to do next? They can do anything. So I guess it's effective. It's just shocking.
It is. I do kind of like hold this scene. I find it a bit offensive every time I watch it. I mean, but then again, there are lots of British films with like grotesque and egregious representations of Americans. I sometimes wonder if Die Hard 2 is revenge for, say, what's his name? Sheriff J.W. Pepper out of Man with the Golden Gun.
Yes, I can see that. This feels fair comparing those two, I think. This isn't the only shocking moment in the film. The part I always forget about is when John McClane stabs a guy in the eye with an icicle.
Yes. It kind of made me think, knowing that Renny Harlin had a bit of a history in the horror genre before he came to this, that felt like something he'd sort of brought over from those particular films.
It does feel like that. It's a very, very Harlin kind of. What can we kill him with? An icicle. That'll do. In the eye. Excellent.
But I mean, let's be face it. I have watched quite a lot of Harlin's oeuvre, and he's not a man that you would say. You wouldn't say his trademark was cinematic subtlety, would you?
No, definitely not. No, I mean, so prior to this and Ford Fairlane, he made A Nightmare on Elm Street 4 was a film that he finished for this, which very much a horror film. And before that is a film called Prison. Have you seen Prison?
I have not.
Prison is great. It's very much a calling card to make a Nightmare on Elm Street film. It stars a young Viggo Mortensen and Lane Smith.
Okay.
And it's set in a prison that's being reopened. Lane Smith is the warden, and Viggo Mortensen's an inmate. And there's like a deceased prisoner who's haunting people and killing them in like Nightmare on Elm Street kind of ways. So a guard gets strangled to death with barbed wire that you see animated. And it's quite good. I'd recommend it's on YouTube. It's not long.
Have you seen Renny Harlin's propaganda movie, Five Days of War?
I have not. It's on the list, but I haven't got to it yet.
Well, I mean, that might be. I can't remember it in great detail, but that actually, you were talking about the film with the biggest body count. That is kind of like a war. Well, it's set. It's not. I guess you could call it a war movie, or it's set during a war. I can't quite remember how it pans out, but that's obviously given the setting for that particular movie, that might actually have a kind of a large body count in that film. Although I don't know how much you see. Some of it may be implied, but whatever. But might be one to that's a very interesting movie, 5 Days of War, where it was about Russia's a film that he made about Russia's invasion of Georgia back in 2000 and something or other, 2005. I think they invaded Georgia, and the film was part funded by people who were, linked to the Georgian government. I think I think a Georgian government minister is listed as a producer on that particular film. So it's kind of a propaganda movie, kind of commissioned or sort of funded by the Georgian government. A very strange project for Harlan to kind of get involved in, but I guess he needed some work. I guess he had a mortgage payment due, and
that's a good description
came
for
his way.
The latter third of his career is a good way of describing that, I think. Since he moved to China in 2015, I think, and made a bunch of films there. He's now kind of a director for hire for anything these days, which is sad, especially for a podcast trying to cover all of the films. But there we are. But yeah, 5 Days of War, we'll cover that eventually, and maybe we'll have you back for it. Who knows? if you're up for talking about it again.
It does have an exploding helicopter in.
There we go. Not his only film. 12 Rounds also had one, but we have covered that.
It did indeed.
And speaking of kind of sponsorship and kind of propaganda, Black & Decker sponsored Die Hard 2. They sponsored it with the intention of promoting their new Univolt cordless drill, and they paid $20,000 towards the film's budget to pay for it, which, pittance over the film's overall budget of $70 million, but there we go. And there was a scene shot with Bruce Willis unscrewing a vent with the drill, where you can clearly see, this is the Black & Decker Univolt cordless drill. I've got it in my pocket at all times. They shot it, and they edited it, and they cut it out. But unfortunately, Black & Decker had booked an entire marketing scheme around this scene, with loads of tie-in events and promotion. And when they found out it cut out, they tried to sue Rennie Harlan, the makers of Die Hard 2, for $150,000 compensation.
I think that's not unreasonable, in my view.
You say that until you find out they never actually paid the initial $20,000 to fund sponsor the film.
That is unreasonable.
So they did not receive that compensation.
Well, I don't know. No damage was done then, really, was it? I mean,
well, apart from the marketing scheme being booked and lots of tie-in events and things being filmed and set up.
All sorts of. I quite like it. With my PR head on, this would be great. The kind of the ructions between Black & Decker that you'd get more. You'd get more notice for your product by the fact that it had been edited out of the film than if it had been actually left in the film. With my PR hat on, I think this is actually a win for Black & Decker. They should have ruthlessly exploited.
Well, sadly, they didn't have you working for them back in 1990, so it seems they missed out on this lucrative opportunity. But there we go. So we have the icicle stab in the eyes. I'd like to just pick out the kind of the deaths in Rennie Harlan films because they are often entertaining. So the guy who gets rammed into the baggage conveyor during the little fight, he doesn't make it. And then Robert Patrick is in this film. There's loads of guys just in little almost cameo roles. Robert Patrick, John Leguizamo is in there. His role was reduced when they find out he was quite short. So he was going to have like a couple of speaking lines and stuff to do. His character is the one on the snowmobile that gets blown up. They gave him, I think, one line that was eventually dubbed in by somebody else. So sad to hear. Mark Boone Jr. apparently is in there somewhere, but I couldn't quite spot him anywhere. Yeah, it's
And
just,
Vondi Curtis Hall, who's been, like, you might not know the name, but you'd know his face. He's been in an
yes.
absolute ton of stuff.
Yeah, he's like
Um,
Sadler's second in command kind of guy, isn't he?
yes,
Yeah.
and it was kind of interesting. The point that you make is there's so many, like, sort of famous faces amongst Sadler's crew in this film, and you compare that to the original Die Hard, where you have
Al
actually
Leong, and that's about it.
exactly Al Leong, and that's about it. I mean,
Well, you
they're
have the guy who
actually
played the bad guy from Ghostbusters 2, Viggo the
yeah.
Carpathian.
And that's it. It's very strange how yeah, you kind of you get these two sort of groups of henchmen, one of which in the kind of, you know, the film, none of those actors sort of went on to do anything, whereas in Die Hard 2, like, you know, almost all of them went on to have, like, you know, interesting to very
Character
good
actor careers, yeah.
Bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, Die Hard 2, you're getting maybe a bigger budget for supporting actors. They're getting a higher caliber, maybe. I think the ones in Die Hard were mostly from Europe, whereas here they are mostly from American, because that's the nature of the characters. So I've not looked into it, but a lot of the original Die Hard henchmen could have had more lucrative careers in Europe, in films of their own language, which I'm less familiar with than the likes of John Leguizamo or Robert Patrick.
Well, I think most of them actually didn't, because I slightly trusting to dim memory here, but I think, you know, because I have sort of looked up these actors, I think, in the past, and I don't think many of them actually, you know, did much. You know, they just literally had, most of them just literally had a handful of roles. And Die Hard is like you know, for all of them, like, Die Hard is the most kind of well known film that they did. So yeah, it's not like they've had sort of extensive careers in German television or anything. They literally, yeah, just a handful of roles, and yeah, for whatever reason, they ended up in Die Hard and never did anything else.
Yeah, just kind of looking at a couple on Wikipedia. One of them had a small role in Living Daylights and a small role in Mission Impossible, but that's kind of about it. One of them was a footballer, and then had like he played Italian Man in Just Married in 2003, and different Italian man in Monster-in-Law in 2005. So yeah, I think you're right. There's small roles, henchman in Action Jackson, that kind of thing. Security guard in Wishmaster. So unfortunately not setting the world on fire with their acting, but that's a shame. They all played good bad guys, but good henchmen in Die Hard.
But yeah, kudos to whoever did the casting in Die Hard 2, because they packed out that henchman crew with some terrific actors. They obviously had an eye for talent.
Yeah, and the other shocking death that I could see coming, but it's still surprising, is the guy who gets his throat slashed by John Amos on the bus, because I think he's spoken like once before. He's been revealed as being the new guy in their group, so he's not a known traitor, so they have to get rid of him, and it's still kind of shocking because he's the young guy, and it's a really very horror movie throat slash, blood spewing death. It's visceral.
I mean, his death is telegraphed. I mean, they should have just had him sort of talk about his his pregnant wife back home and how excited he was about
day away from retirement.
Exactly. Yeah.
He just found out who really shot JFK. He'll let you know as soon as he's back.
Exactly. I mean, that's about the only thing they don't kind of give you as kind of to cue you up that he's about to get offed imminently.
Yeah, but then the guy who does it goes through a plane engine later in the film, so it all balances out later on.
Yeah, there is kind of karma in the universe by the end of this film.
The climactic fight on the plane wing, I always find a bit underwhelming. It never really plays as big as I wanted it to. I mean, I get that it's followed up by the wonderful plane exploding with the trail of fire, which is just beautiful. But I want that fight because we've had William Sadler's Tai Chi set up at the start of the film.
We
he's
have
doing these martial arts on the side of the wheel plane. It is a little bit.
Chekhov's naked Tai Chi.
Yeah. But yes, had he been doing it out there, it would have been a very small Mel Johnson.
Device of theatre.
Yeah, but it's not quite as action as I'd like it to be. But yeah, big explosion.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the. I would agree with you. Like the fight, it doesn't quite work. I guess it probably seemed more exciting on perhaps on paper than it actually plays in the film. Like, oh yeah, they're gonna have a fight on the wing of a jumbo jet that's just about to take off, and yeah, I mean, seeing John Amos ending up in the kind of the engine of the airplane, that's pretty good. But
the engine's still working afterwards.
Exactly.
less believable.
Very very robust devices. You kind of wonder how Tom Hanks ended up in the Hudson. If you can put John Amos through a jet engine, but you can't.
But not a goose.
But not a goose. You can't put a few seagulls through them, and without having massive engine failure. So yes, don't quite know what's going on there with aviation engineering, but yeah, it is a bit of it is a bit of a damp squib. But you know what? I kind of, in the totality of the movie, I kind of don't have it doesn't, kind of like looking at the film analytically, it is a little bit underwhelming. But I think when you're watching it, when you're in the movie, I don't necessarily feel that way about it. So I can kind of, give the film a pass. And then, because obviously then it's, you have the coup de grace with the kind of the, with Bruce Willis lighting the aviation fuel and it racing towards the jet and it blowing up. So that's pretty spectacular and, quite sort of I guess like an inventive idea. So I don't feel cheated by the kind of the denouement of this particular film.
Yeah, I agree. The exploding.
I've talked you round.
Yeah, well, I've always liked the exploding plane. I've never really considered the underwhelmingness of the fight beforehand, just because the plane explodes straight afterwards, and I'm focusing on that. But now I'm just kind of thinking about, like, wait a minute, that fight didn't really do it great. Oh, the plane exploded, it's fine. So I've just been won over again by the progression of the film.
But one thing I did think was that when I was watching that sequence, I was thinking, are they on the same runway as I think it's Fast and Furious 8, which has the kind of 64-mile long runway, because that plane is taxiing for a long time.
It is. I think it is Furious 6, I believe. It's the first one.
Furious 6, that's the one.
But yes, it could well be the same. I really hope Furious 6 was shot in Dulles as well. the least Hollywood location they could shoot at. But yes, I think you're right. So the one fun note I've got is back to William Atherton. The shot they use of him, the kind of the still image the news has when he's broadcasting from the plane is great. Just like mid conversation, nothing you'd use as a profile picture anywhere. Like. I really hope I want to see the footage from the day they shot that, of like just the ones they didn't use, the ones that were like, this is too bad, this one's not quite bad enough, this is the exact right like amount of like, yeah, it looks like him, he's halfway through saying I just that's just a wonderful touch.
It kind of looks like he's just been sort of unexpectedly prodded or something, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, what's that? And then they've like captured that particular moment. It's as you say, very strange. Thornburg. You can't imagine he would be happy that they used that particular image. I imagine when he got back to the office, there was probably some Dennis Franz-esque shouting going on.
You get the feeling a lot of people in the office don't like him. And that's the result. That's what happens when they don't like you. They get to pick your screenshot.
Yeah.
So have you got any more notes on Die Hard 2? Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I think the only other note that I would get to say is that actually looping back to the fact that Die Hard 2 was briefly the most expensive movie ever made, I think you can see that obviously Bruce took a hefty chunk of that in wages, but you can obviously see that a good proportion of the money that went into this film went on a bit of tonsorial enhancement for Bruce Willis's hair in this film, because he's suddenly and certainly on the posters for this film, his hairline has actually miraculously moved forward from where it was in the first Die Hard movie. So I do sadly wasn't a sort of trajectory they continued with the kind of the other Die Hard movies where Bruce's hair becomes ever fuller.
Like Cousin It at this point, if that was the case. Yes. But at least he's on the poster this time. He wasn't on it at all for the first one.
Exactly. So by they realised they'd obviously pushed his hairline and pushed credulity as far as it could go in Die Hard 2, and they kind of retreated both literally and in reality with his hair, and by Die Hard 4 we have a chrome domed hero, and they've not played with his hairline any further, but sad they didn't go down that direction, but worth noting.
Yeah. Good. Well, I have two features I like to do at the end of each one of these episodes. First, I've got a list of how Die Hard 2 is like Deep Blue Sea, because I've got to tie it back into the original film. So actually quite a long list this time, so apologies. There is an upfront exposition dump when McClane is explaining to Vito why he's there. There is a plane being flown by a British pilot that eventually explodes. There's someone living in a church inhabitant. We see some golf clubs, which Sam Jackson had off screen at all times in Deep Blue Sea. There is talking about urinating. There is radar use in a tower. There's an incoming storm. A place of work is disabled. There's an elevator scene. There's walking through pipes spewing steam, which happens a lot more in Deep Blue Sea than you might think. An aircraft crashes, killing everyone on board. Directed by Rennie Harlin, obviously.
Yep.
There's a guy with expert knowledge of the facility, which is Scoggins, Deep Blue Sea, and Marvin here. There's climbing up a ladder and trying to wrench and force a door open at the top of it. The whole thing is a prison escape attempt from
Indeed, yes.
character perspective. So it's a villain's prison escape attempt film, essentially. A character is electrocuted with Thornburg, or a shark in the first time around. There's a high jump down onto a plane wing at this point. There's a climactic explosion. A lighter is used to kill a bad guy. And the hero keeps falling over. Bruce Willis falls over quite a lot in this, as does Thomas Jane.
Just like Thomas Jane, yes. So I think what I've taken from that is that Rennie Harlin is a auteur.
He absolutely is. Go back and if you watch Prison has so many similarities to Deep Blue Sea. There are crucifix necklaces all over that film. I do. The Rennie Harlin film comparisons are generally the longer lists somehow. But the other final note feature I have is how deep and how blue is Die Hard 2. So, Will, if I were to tell you that Deep Blue Sea is on average 14.5 meters deep and 31% blue, this is the depth at which the action on screen takes place at any given point, and the overall amount of screen taken up by blue on average. Do you reckon Die Hard 2 is deeper and or bluer than Deep Blue Sea?
My mind has been blown by this. It's this is the end of a long day for me, Jay. I'm not sure. I don't think I understand the question.
It's not much of a surprise to say that it is certainly not deeper, because all the action takes place up in airplanes or on the ground. The only times I think they went underground at all is with Marvin. That had a very much of a basement feel to it when they were in his hangar. So it works out on average about 848.2 meters up in the air, the action in this film, which is our third highest film. The only films higher than that are Cliffhanger, which is also up in planes, also up mountains for the entirety of the film. And Godzilla vs. Biollante is our highest film, because the ending of that film takes place in space. Which Nick really helped with that one. And in terms of blueness, it's only 1.56% blue. This is our fourth least blue film. Lake Placid, The Covenant, and the black and white Hitchcock film Lifeboat are the only less blue films that we've covered. That was the easiest one to work out was Lifeboat. It was just a big fat zero the whole way through. It's not deep at all. So in terms of the average scores, this is the worst film we've covered in terms of how deep and blue. This is bottom of the list if you look at the averages. So excellent.
Yeah, I didn't understand the question, and I don't understand your answer either. So
good.
Yeah,
that's what
there
we're
you
here
go.
For. That's what. So thank you for joining me, Will. Can you give some plugs? Where can the audience find you elsewhere?
Yes, well, if you're not completely sick of me, then you can check out Exploding Helicopter, where I am, documenting the strange cinematic phenomena of helicopter explosions in films, because they happen much more often than you might have considered. So you can find my website, Exploding Helicopter, at explodinghelicopter.com. We are also a podcast which you can find on pretty much any podcatcher out there. My next episode at the time of this recording is going to be a review of the Con Air ripoff Evasive Action, starring Roy Scheider and some other people, and Jay is a guest on that particular episode, so you can listen to see. I should have. We should have done How Deep Blue Sea or How Con Air-ish. We should have come up with some sort of proper metric for ranking for rating the Con Airishness of Evasive Action. So
that's a new podcast. I think that's a whole separate one.
Exactly. I'll give you first shout on that particular endeavour. But we're also out on social media. So generally, I'm most active on Twitter. So come and find me at Chopper Fireball.
Excellent. And so I was on there for Evasive Action, and if you want to dig back through the archives, you can find me talking about Rampage and Deep Blue Sea over on there. And Mark's been on a couple of times, I think. He was on your spin-off Exploding Jet Ski podcast recently, I think.
That's right, where we were discussing the Citizen Kane of exploding jet ski movies, Waterworld, with Kevin Costner.
A beautiful scene that makes no sense. It's not a bungee cord, it's just a rope. But it still acts as one. Anyway. So good. So yes, you can find Mark and I over on Con Air, the podcast, where we're going through Con Air scene by scene. Although we are taking a little hiatus for a couple of months, we're going to drop some Con Air adjacent previous episodes that we've recorded on other podcasts whilst we catch up on our schedules, because we lost a little bit of time in various places, but that's fine. And you can hear me once a month over on Lamperty, over on the Lambcast, hosting movie trivia, Jeopardy inspired, having a great time over there. And my personal site is lifeversusfilm.com, but nothing happens there, so why would you go there? There's nothing to see. But as for Die Hard 2, come back in a couple of weeks' time for The Long Kiss Goodnight, the other festive film. But as for Die Hard 2, thank you very much to my guest, Will Slater.
Thanks, Shane.
I've been Jake Lewis, and I'll deep blue see you again soon.